I swept into the courtroom, the black robe feeling like a second skin, an armor against the day's parade of foolishness. The murmur of the room died down, as it always does. They know who's in charge the second I walk through that door. My eyes scanned the room, a quick practiced assessment of the players in today's little dramas. On my left, the plaintiff, a woman whose pursed lips told me everything I needed to know about her personality before she even opened her mouth. On my right, the defendant, a kid. He couldn't have been more than 20. His suit was a size too big, the knot on his tie was slightly crooked, and he looked like a deer caught in the headlights of a freight train. This, I thought to myself, is either going to be painfully simple or a masterclass in youthful stupidity. There's rarely an in-between. I sat down, the leather of my chair groaning in protest. I don't have time for groaning. I picked up the case file. Case number 734, I announced, my voice cutting through the silence. The City of New York versus Mr. Daniel Sterling. I looked over my glasses at the kid. Mr. Sterling? That's you, I presume? The one who looks like he's about to have a heart attack? He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. Yes, Your Honor. His voice was quiet, respectful, a good start. It doesn't win you the case, but it keeps you out of the deep end for the first 5 minutes. And you're here because you received a parking ticket, a $150 violation for parking in a commercial-only zone on a Tuesday afternoon. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor. And you're pleading not guilty? I raised an eyebrow. This is usually where the nonsense begins. The litany of excuses. I didn't see the sign. I was only there for a minute. My dog was having a seizure. I've heard it all. I've heard things that would make a fiction writer blush. That's correct, Your Honor, he said, a little more firmly this time. All right, kid's got a spine. Let's see what it's made of. Officer Callahan, I said, turning to the bailiff who had presented the ticket. He wasn't in the room, but his report was, that's all I needed. The ticket was issued at 2:15 p.m. on Elm Street. The report says the vehicle, a 2008 Honda Civic, was parked in a spot clearly marked commercial vehicles only, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Were you driving a commercial vehicle, Mr. Sterling? No, Your Honor. Are you a delivery driver? A plumber? Were you transporting a shipment of anvils, perhaps? My tone was dry. Sarcasm is a tool, and I'm a master craftsman. A faint flicker of a smile crossed his face before he suppressed it. No, Your Honor. I'm a student. A student. I see. And what were you studying at 2:15 p.m. in a commercial parking zone? The migration patterns of parking enforcement officers? The gallery tittered. I shot them a look. This isn't a comedy club. This is my courtroom. The boy, Mr. Sterling, took a deep breath. Your Honor, I was at a job interview. Now that was a new one. Not entirely original, but the delivery was good. He wasn't whining. He was stating a fact. A job interview, I repeated, letting the words hang in the air. An interview for what? Chief of bad decisions? It was for an internship, Your Honor, at a financial firm, Harrison and Grant. I paused. I knew the name. A serious firm. Not the kind of place that hires interns who can't read a parking sign. This just got a little more interesting. I leaned forward, resting my chin on my hand. Let me get this straight. You had an interview at one of the most competitive financial firms in the city, and your master plan was to get your car towed before you even shook the hiring manager's hand? No, Your Honor, of course not. I was running late. My train was delayed. A signal problem at 42nd Street. I panicked. I drove into the city, which I never do. I was circling for 20 minutes, and my interview was at 2 o'clock. I saw the spot, and I made a mistake. I knew it was a risk, but missing the interview felt like a bigger risk. There it was, the truth. No embellishment, no ridiculous story, just a simple, clean admission of a calculated risk gone wrong. I see people lie every day. They squirm, they look away, they talk in circles. Mr. Sterling looked me straight in the eye. He wasn't proud of his decision, but he wasn't hiding from it either. He owned it. In this room, ownership is a rare and valuable currency. I looked down at his file. Full-time student at NYU, applied economics. No prior offenses. Not so much as a speeding ticket. He was clean. I looked back at him, at that ill-fitting suit and the earnest anxiety in his eyes. I remembered being that age. The desperate need to get a foot in the door. The feeling that one single opportunity could be the one that changes everything. The world feels like it's moving at 1,000 miles an hour, and you're just trying not to get run over. So, you were willing to risk a $150 ticket for a chance at an unpaid internship? I asked, my voice softening just a fraction. It's a paid internship, Your Honor. And it wasn't about the money. It was about the opportunity. He was smart. He corrected me, but wasn't a smart aleck about it. He refocused the narrative not on his mistake, but on his motivation. It was impressive. Most people in his position would be stammering about the unfairness of the sign or the predatory nature of the parking authority. He was talking about ambition. And how did the interview go, I asked, genuinely curious now. He hesitated for a second, surprised by the question. I think it went well. They said they'd let me know in a week. A week, I mused, and in the meantime you have this ticket hanging over your head, a reminder of your panic. I stared at him, letting the silence stretch. I saw the gears turning in his head. He was trying to figure out my angle. Was I mocking him? Was I setting a trap? The truth is, I was testing him. I wanted to see if he'd buckle, if he'd start making excuses again. He didn't. He just stood there, straight and respectful, and waited for my judgment. He was a kid who understood that sometimes when you're in a hole, the first thing you have to do is stop digging. This kid wasn't a criminal. He wasn't a scofflaw. He was just a young man trying to build a future who made a poor logistical choice under pressure. And while ignorance of the law is no excuse, the context of the law is everything. The law is supposed to be about order, about justice. Slapping a $150 fine on this kid for this particular infraction in this specific context felt less like justice and more like kicking someone who's already halfway down the stairs. It served no real purpose. It wouldn't teach him a lesson he hadn't already learned the hard way. It was just punitive. And I'm not in the business of punishment. I'm in the business of justice. Sometimes justice is a swift, hard hammer. And sometimes it's something else entirely. I leaned back in my chair. My mind was made up. Now for the delivery. I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a low, deliberate tone that I reserve for moments of clarity. Let me tell you something, Mr. Sterling. This room, this entire courthouse, is built on a foundation of excuses. It's the currency of the irresponsible. I didn't know. I didn't mean to. It wasn't my fault. Every single day I sit here and listen to a parade of people who have abdicated all responsibility for their own lives, and they want me to validate their poor choices. They want a gold star for their spectacular failures. I paused, letting my words sink in. I could see him processing, his young face a mixture of fear and concentration. He was trying to follow my logic, to see where the axe was going to fall. You're going for an interview at a financial firm, I continued, my voice as sharp as a scalpel. It's a world of numbers, of rules, of consequences. You make a bad trade, you lose money. You misread the market, you're out of a job. You park in the wrong spot, you get a ticket. The world does not care that your train was late. Your future boss at Harrison and Grant will not care that you had a flat tire. They care about one thing and one thing only. Results. Do you understand that? Yes, Your Honor, I do. His voice was barely a whisper, but it was firm. So when you tell me that you panicked, what you're really telling me is that you failed to plan. You're an economics major. You should understand risk assessment. The risk wasn't the ticket. The risk was blowing the single biggest opportunity of your life because you couldn't manage your time. The $150 is just the stupid tax you pay for that lesson. I picked up the ticket, holding it between my thumb and forefinger as if it were a contaminated specimen. You think this piece of paper is your problem today. This isn't your problem. This is a symptom of your problem. Your problem is thinking that you can cut corners and that the universe will somehow bend to your will because you're a nice kid with a big dream. He looked down at his shoes. I had him. He was seeing the bigger picture. The ticket was no longer about money. It was about his own competence. However, I said, and his head snapped back up, his eyes wide. That's the turn. You break them down, and then you see if there's anything worth building back up. You did something that 99% of the people who stand where you're standing fail to do. You told the truth. You didn't invent a dying grandmother. You didn't claim the sign was written in a foreign language. You looked me in the eye and said, I panicked and I made a mistake. It was a dumb mistake, but you owned it. I stared at him, my expression unreadable. I'm not here to be their friend. I'm here to be a judge. But being a judge means seeing the whole person, not just the infraction. You're a student. You probably don't have $150 to just throw away on a moment of foolishness. You need that money for books, for rent, for a tie that actually fits your neck. A small, involuntary smile touched his lips and then vanished. I'm not in the business of penalizing ambition, I said, my decision landing with the finality of a gavel. I'm in the business of rewarding responsibility. And today, you were responsible enough to tell the truth. I took the ticket and, with a decisive flick of my wrist, I ripped it in half. Then in half again. The sound was crisp and final in the quiet courtroom. I dropped the pieces into the wastebasket beside my bench. Case dismissed. He stood there, stunned, blinking as if he couldn't believe what he'd just seen. He opened his mouth. Probably to say thank you, but I cut him off. Don't thank me, I said, my voice back to its usual brisk efficiency. Thank me by being on time for the rest of your life. Thank me by triple-checking the details. Thank me by becoming the kind of man who doesn't need to panic because he's already 5 steps ahead. You have a good head on your shoulders, Mr. Sterling. Start using it for logistics, not just for academics. I gathered my files for the next case, already moving on. But as he turned to leave, I looked up one last time. For the first time that day, a genuine, small smile broke through my stern facade. It was brief, a flash of sunlight on a cloudy day. And Mr. Sterling, I called out. He paused at the door. Good luck with the job. He walked out, and the door swung shut behind him, leaving a small pocket of silence in its wake. It lasted all of 3 seconds. Next case, Bird announced, his voice booming through the room. And just like that, the moment was gone. The machine of justice, or at least my version of it, churned back to life. In shuffled the next pair, a man and a woman, probably in their late 40s, who looked like they'd been arguing since the invention of fire. The plaintiff, a woman with hair dyed an unfortunate shade of magenta, was clutching a small, glitter-covered shoebox. The defendant looked like his face had been permanently frozen in a state of weary resentment. I didn't even need the file. I could smell the stupidity from my bench. All right, what's this? I said, sighing internally. Let me guess. He borrowed your lucky Tupperware and returned it with a chip in the lid. He murdered my Bartholomew, the woman shrieked, tears welling in her eyes. I blinked. Murder? Now that's a charge. A bit above my pay grade, but I'll hear it. Bartholomew is your son? Your husband? He's my hamster, she wailed, thrusting the glittery shoebox forward. And this is all that's left of him. I put my head in my hands. I really did. For a full 5 seconds, I just rested my forehead on my knuckles and thought about Daniel Sterling. I thought about a young man in a cheap suit, terrified but honest, talking about financial internships and taking responsibility, a kid on the first rung of the ladder to a meaningful life. And now, I was back in the circus, presiding over the funeral of a hamster named Bartholomew. This is my life. A jarring pendulum swing from a glimmer of hope to the abyss of human pettiness. Ma'am, I said, my voice dangerously low. This is a courtroom. It is not a pet cemetery. What is your legal claim? She said, pointing a trembling, accusatory finger, agreed to watch Bartholomew while I was on my singles cruise to the Bahamas. I left him a detailed, laminated, 3-page instruction manual, food, water, wheel time, and his nightly kale supplement. And when I came back, Bartholomew was gone, and he, the finger jabbed again, replaced him with a cheap imposter hamster. I looked at the defendant. He just shook his head. She's nuts. The thing died. It was like 100 years old in hamster years. It went to sleep and didn't wake up. I felt bad, so I went to the pet store and got another one that looked just like it. A gesture of goodwill. He was a Russian dwarf, she screamed. You replaced him with a common Syrian. I can tell the difference. This is what I deal with. This is the intellectual landscape I navigate every single day. I looked from the hysterical woman to the exhausted man, and I swear I could feel my brain cells committing suicide in protest. I thought about the clarity of the previous case. A rule was broken, a reason was given, an assessment was made, a judgment was rendered. It was clean. This was a swamp of emotional nonsense. So you're suing for the cost of a hamster? I asked, my patience worn down to a single frayed thread. I'm suing for emotional distress, she sobbed. Bartholomew was family. Did Bartholomew have a job? Did he contribute to the rent? I shot back. Did he have a life insurance policy? No? Then he wasn't family. He was a rodent. A rodent you entrusted to a man who, by the looks of him, can barely be trusted to remember to put on matching socks. The defendant nodded in agreement before realizing it was also an insult to him. I banged my gavel. The sound was like a gunshot in the ridiculous theater of it all. Enough! You, I said, pointing to the plaintiff, your hamster died of old age. It happens. It's called the circle of life. You don't get to sue someone for that. You, I said, pointing to the defendant, are an idiot for trying to swap out the hamster. What did you think she wouldn't notice? Did you lie? Yes. Was it a legally actionable lie? No, it was just a stupid one. So my ruling is this. Case dismissed. The court is not going to spend one more second of the taxpayers' money on the tragic death and subsequent replacement of a hamster. You two are a perfect storm of foolishness. And frankly, you deserve each other. Get out of my courtroom. They scurried out, still bickering. I watched them go, a bad taste in my mouth. It was cases like that, the endless mind-numbing parade of morons, that made the rare ones stand out. The Daniel Sterlings, the ones who, for a brief moment, reminded me that not everyone is a lost cause. That sometimes a sharp dose of reality is all someone needs to get on the right track. As Bird called the next case, I found myself hoping, for some reason, that the kid would get the job. It was a fleeting, unprofessional thought, but it was there. And in this room, a little hope goes a very, very long way. The hamster people were gone, but the scent of idiocy lingered in the air like cheap perfume. I took a sip of water, trying to wash the taste of it out of my mouth. Sometimes I feel less like a judge and more like a zookeeper for a very poorly managed human zoo. There's no time to dwell on it. The wheels of justice are relentless, and they are usually grinding down someone's very stupid claim. Next case, I said, pulling the file towards me. Gable versus Rossi. A woman who looked like she practiced crying in the mirror every morning stood up. Her lower lip was already trembling. It was a well-rehearsed performance. Beside her, a man in a dusty work shirt, probably in his 50s, looked like he was about to have an aneurysm. His face was red, and he was gripping the back of the defendant's chair so hard his knuckles were white. Anger. This wasn't the look of a guilty man. It was the look of a man who was being royally screwed over. My gut doesn't lie. Miss Gable, I began, my eyes scanning the complaint. You are suing Mr. Rossi for $5,000, the maximum amount allowed in this court. The reason, I paused for dramatic effect, reading her own loopy handwriting, for the senseless and brutal destruction of a priceless family heirloom. Brutal destruction? What did he do, Miss Gable? Run it over with a steamroller? She dabbed at a non-existent tear with a tissue. He was in my home, Your Honor. I hired him to do some plumbing work. He was careless, so careless. I heard a terrible crash from the living room, and I ran in, and there it was. My great-grandmother Genevieve's vase shattered into a million pieces. It was from the Ming Dynasty. I nearly laughed out loud. The Ming Dynasty! Of course it was. It's never a souvenir mug from Atlantic City. It's always the Ming Dynasty. Really? The Ming Dynasty? Your great-grandmother, Genevieve, she spent a lot of time in 15th century China, did she? Or did she pick it up at a yard sale in Queens? It was passed down through generations, she insisted, her voice quivering with manufactured indignation. I see. A priceless, multi-generational Ming Dynasty vase. You must have photographs of it, appraisals, insurance documents. You know, the kind of paperwork people tend to keep for priceless artifacts. I leaned forward, my elbows on the bench. This is the part where the story always falls apart. Well, she stammered, the appraisal papers were lost in a small flood we had a few years ago. And I never took pictures. I was afraid the flash would damage the ancient glaze. The ancient glaze. Beautiful. She's creative, I'll give her that. She's also a complete and utter liar. You were afraid the flash from a camera would damage a piece of pottery that has survived for 600 years? Is that what you're telling me? I turned my attention to the defendant. Mr. Rossi. You're a plumber? Yes, Your Honor. For 25 years, he said, his voice tight with frustration. I was in her house to fix a leaking pipe under the kitchen sink. That's it. I was in the kitchen the whole time, on my hands and knees, in a cramped cabinet. I never even set foot in her living room. So you're saying you have the power of telekinesis, I asked Miss Gable. You're claiming he used his mind to throw a wrench from the kitchen to shatter your imaginary vase in the living room? He's lying, she insisted. He took a break. He must have been wandering around. Mr. Rossi, I said, ignoring her. When did you first hear about this broken vase? When I gave her the bill for the plumbing work, $280. Suddenly, she starts screaming about a vase. Says I owe her $5,000 and she's not paying my bill. It's a scam, Your Honor. I'm a small business. I can't afford to be shaken down like this. His anger was genuine. Her tears were not. The math is very simple. Miss Gable, do you have any proof at all that this vase even existed, let alone that Mr. Rossi broke it? A witness? A single shred of evidence that isn't coming out of your mouth? Her eyes lit up. The classic blunder of the amateur liar. They always think they've got one clever trick up their sleeve. Yes, I have a picture of the broken pieces. She proudly handed a photograph to the bailiff, who passed it to me. It was, indeed, a picture of a shattered blue and white vase on a hardwood floor. And I have this, she added, handing over a printout from an auction website. It showed a similar-looking vase with a price tag of $5,000. It's an identical piece. I looked at the photo of the broken pieces. Then I looked at her, then back at the photo. I held it up. This is your proof. Yes, she said, a smug little smile playing on her lips. She thought she had me. She thought she was smart. But smart people don't try to pull a fast one in my courtroom. They just don't. Because I'm smarter. I leaned forward, tapping the photograph. You know, photography is a wonderful thing, Miss Gable. It captures a moment in time, and you've captured the moment your vase was broken. You've also captured what's lying on the floor next to it. I looked up, my eyes locking with hers. Her smile faltered. That's a newspaper, isn't it? The New York Post. Her face went pale. I can't quite read the headline, I said, squinting for effect, though I could see it perfectly. But I can read the date. It's right there at the top. Tuesday, October 12th. I looked down at Mr. Rossi's invoice. Mr. Rossi, what day were you at Miss Gable's house? Tuesday, October 19th, Your Honor. He said, a look of dawning comprehension on his face. I dropped the photo on the bench. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. I let her swim in it. I let her feel the ice-cold water of her own stupidity closing in around her. So let me see if I have this straight. I said, my voice like chipping ice. Your priceless Ming Dynasty vase was broken a full week before Mr. Rossi ever set foot in your house. You're not a victim, Miss Gable. You're a con artist with a glue gun and a story. You thought you could come in here, commit perjury, and defraud a working man out of $5,000 plus a $280 plumbing bill. I stood up, my voice rising. You are a fraud and you are a disgrace. Judgment for the defendant. You will pay his bill of $280 in full today. And I am referring this case to the district attorney's office for investigation into insurance fraud and perjury. Now get out of my sight. She didn't scurry out like the hamster lady. She practically evaporated. One moment she was standing there, her face a mask of shock and humiliation. The next, she was a blur heading for the exit. Mr. Rossi, the plumber, looked like a man who had just been pulled from a burning building. He nodded at me, a deep, heartfelt gesture of gratitude, and said, "Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you." "Don't thank me, Mr. Rossi," I said, my tone softening slightly. "Thank Miss Gable for being a terrible liar. Now go cash your check." He left, and for a moment, the room felt clean again. It's a satisfying feeling, cutting through the lies and getting to the simple, hard truth. It's like being a surgeon excising a tumor of deceit. Some days, that's all that keeps me going. Bird called the next case. The afternoon was wearing on. My energy, which is considerable, was beginning to flag under the sheer weight of the foolishness I'd been forced to witness. I was looking forward to going home, pouring a glass of something cold, and not speaking to another human being for at least 3 hours. The final litigants of the day approached the bench. 2 young women, early 20s, dressed in a way that suggested they spent more time on their social media profiles than on their resume. They both had that air of unearned confidence that comes from never having been told no in their entire lives. This was going to be painful. "All right," I sighed, picking up the file. "Miss Thompson versus Miss Riley. This is a claim for $1,200 for a plane ticket to Ibiza." My eyebrows shot up. "Ibiza? How very exotic. What's the problem? Did the DJ play a bad set? Did the ocean fail to be the correct shade of blue?" The plaintiff, Miss Thompson, tossed her perfectly highlighted hair. "Ashley," she said, gesturing to her former friend, "bailed on our girl's trip at the last minute. I had to pay for her ticket, and she refuses to pay me back." "Is that true, Miss Riley?" I asked the defendant. "You backed out of a trip to Ibiza?" "I had to," Miss Riley said, her voice dripping with drama. "It was a total emergency. My aura reader told me that my chakras were dangerously misaligned and that long-haul air travel could result in a permanent disruption of my spiritual energy." I just stared at her. I waited for the punchline. There wasn't one. She was serious. Her aura reader, her chakras, her spiritual energy. I felt a headache coming on, a sharp, stabbing pain right behind my eyes. This was a new level of idiocy. We had transcended hamster funerals and fake Ming vases and entered a new ethereal plane of stupid. "Your aura reader," I repeated, making sure I'd heard her correctly. "Does this aura reader have a name?" "Of course," Miss Riley said brightly. "She's named Moonbeam." "Moonbeam," I said, my voice flat. "And does Moonbeam have a degree in whatever it is you think she has a degree in? Or does she just have a talent for separating fools from their money?" "She's a certified crystal therapist and a spiritual guide," Miss Riley insisted, offended. "She's very respected in the community." "I'm sure she is," I said dryly. "And what does she charge for a chakra realignment? $500 and a piece of your soul?" I turned to the plaintiff, Miss Thompson. "When you booked this trip, did you two have an agreement, a contract, even a text message saying, 'I, Ashley Riley, being of sound mind and misaligned chakras, agree to pay for my half of this ridiculous trip, no matter what my spiritual guru says?'" "We booked it together online," Miss Thompson said. "We've been planning it for months. It was all over our Instagram stories." "I don't care about your Instagram stories," I snapped. "This isn't a court of public opinion, it's a court of law." In the real world, where the rest of us live, we have things called contracts and personal responsibility. We don't make major financial decisions based on the advice of someone named Moonbeam. I looked back and forth between them, two perfectly healthy, privileged young women, arguing over a luxury vacation that was derailed by a spiritual charlatan. The sheer, unadulterated frivolity of it all was staggering. Out in the real world, people were struggling to pay their rent, to feed their children. Mr. Rossi was fighting for a $280 plumbing bill that was crucial to his small business. Daniel Sterling was sweating in an oversized suit, trying to get a foothold in a brutal economy. And these two were here wasting my time, wasting the court's time, because one of them thought her spiritual energy was more important than a $1,200 commitment. The memory of the kid, Daniel Sterling, flashed in my mind again. His earnestness, his anxiety, his straightforward ambition. The contrast was so stark it was almost comical. He was worried about building a future. They were worried about their auras. It was two different universes colliding in my courtroom on the same afternoon. Let me explain something to you both, I said, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of absolute authority. Life is not a trip to Ibiza. It's hard. It's full of responsibilities and obligations that you don't get to just walk away from because your mood changes or because some fraud with a bag of rocks tells you your energy is off. You made a promise, Miss Riley. You committed to a financial obligation? Your friend relied on that promise? She is now out $1,200 because of your flaky, ridiculous, indefensible nonsense. I looked at Miss Riley. Your chakras are your problem. They are not Miss Thompson's financial burden. The next time you feel your spiritual energy is disrupted, I suggest you try paying your debts. It's amazing how quickly that can align a person's priorities. Judgment for the plaintiff in the amount of $1,200, I declared, banging the gavel. And a word of advice, Miss Thompson? Get better friends. And get a grip on reality. They stood there, mouths agape, as if they couldn't comprehend a world where their feelings weren't the most important thing in the room. Court is adjourned, I said, standing up. I'd had enough foolishness for one day. As I walked back to my chambers, I felt a profound sense of weariness. But underneath it, there was that one small, persistent thought. The memory of a nervous kid in a cheap suit. It was a reminder that for all the Bartholomews and Moonbeams of the world, once in a while, you get a Daniel Sterling. And on a day like today, that's just enough to make you come back and do it all again tomorrow. I walked back to my chambers, the heavy oak door clicking shut behind me, a sound that finally, blessedly, sealed out the noise of the world. I shrugged off the black robe, the weight of it leaving my shoulders. It's not just fabric, it's a mantle. Out there, I'm an institution. In here, I'm a woman who has just spent 8 hours listening to the most ridiculous stories humanity can conjure. I hung the robe on its hook, armor off. My chambers are quiet, orderly. Everything has its place. It's the antidote to the chaos I preside over. The law books on the shelves are silent, their spines straight and uniform. They contain logic, precedent, reason. They bear no resemblance to the emotional, illogical swamp I wade through every day. Bird knocked once before entering, as is his custom. He placed a stack of files for tomorrow on the corner of my desk and a cup of black coffee next to it. He knows I don't like sugar and I don't like small talk. He's been with me for years. He's seen more human folly than a bartender on New Year's Eve. That was a day, he said, his voice a low rumble. It wasn't a question or a complaint, just a statement of fact. The usual menagerie, I replied, sinking into my leather chair. We had rodents, fake antiques, and damaged chakras. All we were missing was a guy suing a pigeon for stealing his hot dog. Bird almost smiled. For him, that's a belly laugh. The kid with the parking ticket, though, Sterling, he didn't need to say more. It was the one file from the day that wasn't just noise. It was a signal. What about him? I asked, though I knew what he was getting at. You let him walk? I didn't let him walk, I corrected, my tone sharp. I dismissed an infraction based on the context. There's a difference. Did he break the rule? Yes, 100%. Was fining him the appropriate remedy? No. It would have been pointless I leaned back, swirling the coffee in its cup. Look at the other cases today. A woman wants $5,000 for a vase. She broke herself. A girl defaults on a $1,200 debt because her aura reader told her to. They have no concept of consequence, of cause and effect. They live in a fantasy world where they are the perpetual victims of a universe that is somehow conspiring against them. This kid, Sterling, he was different. He lives in the real world. In the real world, your train is late. In the real world, you panic. In the real world, you make a dumb choice under pressure. But in the real world, you also have to stand up and own that choice. He didn't blame the transit authority. He didn't blame the city for a lack of parking. He blamed himself. Do you have any idea how rare that is? Bird just stood there, listening. He's a good listener. My job isn't just to apply fines like a parking meter, I continued, thinking aloud as much as I was talking to him. It's to dispense a certain kind of justice. Sometimes that means hitting someone square in the wallet, but sometimes the lesson is more valuable than the money. That kid got a lecture on preparedness and personal responsibility that he will remember every time he goes to a job interview for the rest of his life. That has a far better return on investment for society than his $150. It wasn't about being nice. I'm not nice. Nice doesn't get people to pay their rent or return their neighbor's lawnmower. It was about being effective. I saw a kid who was one bad break away from getting discouraged. Kicking him when he was down served no purpose. It wouldn't make the streets safer. It wouldn't make him a better citizen. It would just make him poorer and more cynical. I'm not in the cynicism business. I see enough of it already. I took a sip of my coffee. It was hot, bitter, and uncomplicated. Just how I like it. He was scared to death, Bird noted. Good, I said. He should have been. A little bit of fear is a healthy motivator. It's what keeps you from making the same stupid mistake twice. He'll be 30 minutes early for every important event for the rest of his life. Mark my words. I looked down at the stack of new files for tomorrow. Another day, another deluge of disputes over borrowed money, bad relationships, and breathtakingly poor judgment. But the thought of the Sterling kid, it was like a small clearing in a dense, overgrown forest. A place where things made sense. I picked up my briefcase, ready to leave. The day was done. As I stood up, a thought occurred to me. An unprofessional, purely curious thought. Bird, I said, pausing at the door. That financial firm, the one the Sterling kid was interviewing at. What was the name again? Harrison and Grant. He answered without missing a beat. Harrison and Grant, I repeated softly to myself. I nodded, a quick, sharp gesture. It meant nothing. It was just a data point, a loose end from the day's proceedings. I walked out of my chambers, leaving the files, the robe, and the chaos behind me. But as I headed out of the courthouse and into the cacophony of the city streets, I found myself thinking that for the first time in a long time, I was genuinely interested in the outcome of one of my cases after they left my courtroom. It was an unfamiliar feeling, and I wasn't entirely sure what to do with it. A week passed, a week filled with the usual litany of human failings. I presided over a dispute involving a stolen lawn gnome, a case where a man sued his ex-girlfriend for the cost of a tattoo of her name he'd gotten on his neck. She should have known it wouldn't last, he'd argued, as if permanence was her responsibility, and a truly baffling fight between two neighbors over the rightful ownership of fallen leaves. Every day, I felt like an anthropologist studying a civilization in terminal decline. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, as I was wrapping up a particularly mind-numbing case about a faulty hairdryer, Bird approached the bench. He did so with a quiet urgency that was unusual for him. He never interrupts proceedings unless it's important. He slid a single folded piece of paper in front of me, his face impassive. "This came by messenger for you, Judge," he said, his voice a low murmur that only I could hear. I raised an eyebrow. I don't get messages in the courtroom. My life is compartmentalized. There's the court, and there's everything else. The two do not mix. I unfolded the note. It wasn't a court document. It was on thick, expensive-looking cream-colored stationery, the kind with a letterhead embossed at the top. The letterhead read, Harrison and Grant. My heart, an organ that I generally regard as a purely functional pump, gave a little jolt. I read the short, typed message. Dear Judge Judy, my name is Robert Harrison. I am a senior partner at Harrison and Grant. I am also a longtime admirer of your work and the clarity you bring to a very messy world. Last week, one of our promising young interns, Daniel Sterling, mentioned that he had the unique experience of appearing in your courtroom on the day of his final interview with our firm. He recounted the story of his parking ticket and the judgment you rendered. I'm not writing to comment on the legal particulars of the case. I'm writing to tell you that his telling of that story was the final deciding factor in our decision to offer him the internship. He didn't tell it as a story about getting lucky. He told it as a story about accountability, about being called out on his own poor planning, and about receiving a lesson in professionalism that was more valuable than anything he's learned in a classroom. In our business, we can teach anyone how to read a balance sheet. We can't teach character. We can't teach honesty. We can't teach a person how to own their mistakes. Mr. Sterling demonstrated that he already possesses those qualities, thanks in no small part to his 30 minutes in your courtroom. We believe he has a very bright future with our firm. Thank you for your service. Sincerely, Robert Harrison. I read it twice. I, Judy Shainlin, am not easily surprised. I've seen it all. I've heard every lie, every excuse, every pathetic justification a human being can invent. But this was new. I looked up from the note, my eyes finding birds. He had a look on his face I'd never seen before. It was a genuine, full-fledged smile. I felt a strange warmth spread through my chest. It wasn't pride. It wasn't sentimentality. It was validation. A confirmation that what I do here, day in and day out, wading through the muck of human disputes, isn't just about resolving petty squabbles. It's about setting a standard. It's about drawing a clear, bright line between right and wrong, between responsibility and excuse-making, and every once in a while, someone actually sees that line. I thought about Daniel Sterling. I had given him a lecture, not a lottery ticket. I had challenged his thinking, not absolved his mistake. And somehow, that had been the key that unlocked the door for him. He hadn't just heard my words, he had understood the principle behind them. And more importantly, he had been able to articulate that principle to his future boss. The kid wasn't just smart, he was wise. There's a world of difference between the two. I looked out at the two litigants standing before me, the ones who had been arguing about the hairdryer. They were still glaring at each other, their faces contorted with petty rage. A moment ago, they had been the center of my universe. Now they seemed impossibly small. Their little drama, their $500 claim, it was nothing. It was just noise. The real work, the important work, was what happened when people walked out of this room. Did they leave with nothing but resentment? Or did they leave with a sliver of understanding, a newfound respect for the simple, brutal truth? Most days, I don't know the answer. The stories end when they walk through that door. But today, a story had come back. And it had a better ending than I could have imagined. I carefully folded Robert Harrison's letter and tucked it into the pocket of my robe. It was a tangible piece of evidence that on at least one occasion, justice had been served not just in the letter of the law, but in the spirit of it. I looked at the bickering couple in front of me. My patience, which had been worn thin, was suddenly replenished. My purpose, which can sometimes get clouded by the sheer volume of foolishness, was crystal clear. I banged my gavel, the sound sharp and final. All right, let's get back to this hairdryer, I said, my voice ringing with a renewed authority. The truth isn't going to find itself.